when we design our curriculum, we typically think about the range of content areas and skills that we want to integrate into that curriculum, and it's often referred to as infusion. Now, one approach is this, that you identify the fact that you want to put metacognitive, cognitive learning strategies into the curriculum so that you can develop those skills, and you then get a list of different types of cognitive learning strategies and metacognitive strategies, and you kind of pour them into the curriculum. You may say, well, in the first couple of weeks we're going to do this, next couple of weeks we're going to do that. Now, that seems quite logical. However, there's a better way of doing this. It still involves infusing these skills, but you start from the curriculum itself. Look at the curriculum and say, well, okay, where in this curriculum do I have good opportunities to develop types of thinking, analysis, compare and contrast, inference, interpretation, evaluation, even creative thinking, and also the idea that metacognition runs right through the curriculum. So again, you would want to get students aware of metacognition pretty early on. Now, having identified the types of learning outcomes and the content areas that are most useful for application type activities where students need to think, need to show a fairly deep understanding and eventual competence, then you look at the menu of cognitive learning strategies and say, well, are these most appropriate at this time for helping the students to learn generally and giving them the practice to use these skills to build understanding and competence? So let's look at some of the key framing questions. Firstly, what are the types of student learning outcomes that are most important in your curriculum? And you identify those, and then you go on to say, well, in this curriculum, when I'm dealing with these outcomes, what are some cognitive learning strategies that will help students meet these specific outcomes? For example, students are going to do a fair bit of reading, then techniques to how to skim read, how to browse are useful, and eventually as they take this information, graphic organisers such as mind maps are very good for organising that information, and they have to put key stuff into memory. Then they need to do various rehearsal techniques and to review their learning to ensure that it's become consolidated in long-term memory. As I mentioned briefly earlier, is that metacognition runs throughout the learning process. So it's pretty good to make students aware that they can think about their thinking and think about managing themselves. And by doing this and using good strategies, they're likely to be more successful, as we saw in the framework in episode 3. Then it's a question of saying, right, okay, when to teach these strategies, develop these skills in the curriculum, what lessons that will best support the subject content learning. And finally, as we know, it's not just a question of making students aware so that they develop an understanding. They will need to do sufficient deliberate practice to develop the skills involved. So that's what we mean by infusing metacognitive, cognitive skills